Fala, minha gente! Raquel da Educação Canina, como estamos? Hoje, gente, eu tô aqui para rodar com vocês uma entrevista que eu fiz na segunda-feira com esse professor Sam Vaknin. Esse cara é uma das primeiras pessoas. Quero fazer uma introduçãozinha antes de eu rodar a entrevista e eu vou estar aqui com vocês para a gente ir conversando nos comentários e vou mostrar para vocês, né? Como que foi essa entrevista e eu vou estar aqui caso vocês tenham dúvida, que tenham perguntas que vocês queiram fazer durante a live, porque eu acho muito importante a gente assistir isso com muito cuidado, com muita atenção. Transtorno de personalidade é um assunto que eu comecei a estudar, vamos dizer assim, de uns 3 anos para cá. Acho que eu vi uma importância muito grande em entender isso na dinâmica não só do atendimento com os cachorros, mas de forma geral em relações humanas. Eu acho que muitas pessoas se perdem, não entendem o que está acontecendo em relações diferentes. Boa noite, gente! Boa noite, boa noite, boa noite! Eu acho que muita gente não entende o que isso significa e ninguém melhor do que esse cara aqui para mostrar para vocês o que tudo isso é, tá? Ele foi uma das primeiras pessoas, ele foi a primeira pessoa, né, a escrever na internet sobre narcisismo. O site dele tá nos comentários aqui, tá na descrição do vídeo se vocês quiserem ver. É o site mais antigo, ele criou nos anos 90 falando sobre narcisismo. Ele fala sobre outros transtornos de personalidade também. E essa entrevista foi na segunda-feira de manhã, foi bem legal. E eu demorei um pouquinho para fazer a legenda e botar tudo direitinho, mas eu quero que vocês prestem muita atenção. Eu tenho certeza que muitos de vocês conhecem pessoas com esse tipo de transtorno, lidam com pessoas assim no dia a dia, muitos de vocês são casados, têm familiares assim. É muito, mas muito importante a gente entender transtorno de personalidade. Todo mundo que presta serviço de forma geral, em algum momento da vida, vai esbarrar com pessoas assim. Então, é uma coisa importante, tá? É uma coisa muito importante. Então, em nome da personalidade das pessoas que amam pensar e refletir. Vamos assistir a entrevista, Janderson. Vamos assistir a entrevista. Eu acho que transtorno de personalidade. Isso que você está perguntando é interessante, porque tem gente que evita, mas mais importante do que você pensar em quem ama pensar e refletir são as pessoas que evitam isso. Isso tem um impacto talvez muito maior no dia a dia das pessoas do que qualquer outra coisa. Eu acompanho o trabalho dele há mais ou menos 3 anos, tá? Eu já li 3 livros dele, ele tem um livro bem interessante que fala sobre a história dele, ele desmembra muito bem, acho que como ninguém, a realidade do transtorno de personalidade. Lúcia, meu anjo, boa noite, boa noite, boa noite, obrigado por estar aqui. Eu acho que ninguém melhor do que ele, ninguém detalha tão bem o que é o transtorno de personalidade narcisista, a psicopatia, as características do borderline, enfim. Eu vou estar aqui com vocês, eu vou começar a rodar essa entrevista, é maravilhosa, tá? Se vocês tiverem qualquer dúvida, vão deixando aqui nos comentários, se for o caso, eu paro, interrompo para responder as perguntas de vocês, se a gente chegar nesse ponto. Eu acredito que a legenda tá ok, mas sem mais delonga, vamos lá, vamos para a entrevista. Vamos lá. There you go. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is because I've been in the service industry for a long time, training. Play out in their heads. How it's almost like you see the sky is blue, but for them it's red, and they're just so convinced of that. So if you could start by describing a little bit of this process, I know it begins at an early age. Peraí. It's really something that I struggle to understand. How can you just Peraí, pausa, gente. Vocês estão escutando o áudio? Voltou. Eu tinha me botado no mudo aqui. Eu acho que quando eu me botei no mudo, ficou sem áudio. Agora voltou, né? Então tá bom. Eu vou continuar aqui, porque eu acho que se eu tirar meu áudio, sai o áudio de lá também. Então vamos lá. Vamos continuar.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. If I will answer your question, you have my word for whatever it's worth. I would like to ask you a question, however.
Yes, of course.
You said you've been working with dogs.
Yes, as a dog trainer for 15 years.
Right. Have you ever come across dogs who display narcissistic traits or narcissistic behaviors?
I think the parallel that I draw with dogs is that dogs are entirely transactional, which is something that I see a lot in personality disorders. For dogs, you have to either reward or punish. That's how you define their behavior. And this is one of the things that you kind of notice in personality disorders because there's really dogs don't have emotional depth like we do. They just don't attach to you like that. You have to build it up basically in transactions. That's how it works.
I'm very surprised because that's what people say about cats. They say that dogs do attach and bond and are very loyal and very emotional and so on, and that cats are psychopathic and cold and detached. But
I
from
heard
our
that too.
experience, from our
I
experience,
think well, I think dogs they need you, right? This is why people confuse things. Dogs are pack animals, so they form their packs based on survival. So it's the survival of the fittest. I want the strongest ones, the ones that can hunt, that can run, that can secure shelter. Of course, they do want to be with you, but I've been around dogs for so long that I've seen, for example, families that cannot handle their dogs and they have to rehome their dogs. They adapt just fine with the new family. So it's not like I'm not saying they don't have a bond. This is one of the reasons why I became so controversial in my area because I was always the one to say they don't have the same level. Maybe they do attach in a way, but not in a way that you expect. They can be okay in a different family tomorrow.
Now that sounds a lot like babies, like very young
Yes.
babies. Babies are transactional and
Yes.
they bond transactionally. That means if you feed them and give them shelter and so on, they love you. And if you
Yes.
don't, then they're very angry at you and they cry and they reject you and so on and so forth. And so does it have to do with, do you think, the level of psychological development or emotional maturation? I mean, dogs are comparable to 2, 3 years old, maybe, in terms of IQ and so on. Would you say that's the issue?
I think I've trained dogs and I've owned dogs that came into my life when they were young, very young ones, and I also adopted adult dogs.
No, I'm talking about human babies. Human babies are like that.
Oh yeah, oh no, I think human in when we are babies, I think it's entirely transactional. I think we don't
exactly
get
like dogs. Do you think it's because do you think it's because psychologically and mentally and intellectually we're at the level of dogs when we are, let's say, 1 year old or 2 years old?
I agree.
You think it's a question of maturation?
Yes. I don't think we develop enough. It's one of the things that I was thinking about the other day. A lot of us don't have memories of that age. We really don't remember much. I don't think I have. I think my first memories are probably around 4 years old, maybe. Or I remember something, one or other event before that, but you don't really have any context before that. So I totally agree with you when you say the baby understands the world through the mother, and it's they're one with the mother. They just don't see outside of that because it's just hard for them. They just don't have the mental development for that. Mm-hmm. So I agree. I agree. It's kind of like
when dogs interact with other dogs, do you see any equivalence of human patterns of interaction? Do they become human? Can you humanize them? Can you anthropomorphize them? Can you say they're like people?
I don't think so. I think they're very primate, if you can put it that way. I've owned dogs for a long time. I think it's really based on survival. They're very primal. You give me this, I'll give you that.
With dogs, I'm talking about between dogs.
Between dogs, yes, between dogs. Like at one point, I've had 6 dogs of my own. I have right here 2. The getting along is really hierarchy. Somebody has to be on top. Somebody, you are the one that's supposed to be on top when you own dogs. So you're supposed to be the one to define the rules. And they respond perfectly when somebody takes on that role. That's how it is. Somebody has to take on that role. Like in between two dogs in the same pack, you will always see that dynamic being established before anything else.
The hierarchy.
If you put two dogs in a room, they've never seen each other, the first thing they're going to do is determine hierarchy. Once that's determined, then everything else follows. And then you're going to see that they want to adjust. They want to make sure everything is okay. So one is too hyper, the other one is going to correct it. It's always going to be that attempt to level up and make sure everything is in peace. Otherwise, somebody's going to die because dogs are either all or nothing. You're either part of my pack or you have to go, like entirely. You have to be gone.
And within the pack, they're protective, they're loyal, they are within the
pack. I think what I see in them is they might have differences among each other, but in front of an enemy, absolutely they're a unit. There's always going to be that way if a pack is properly established.
Reminds me of the military.
Well, yeah, I mean, because for them, the pack people tend to confuse that and think that, oh, they love each other. That's not what it is. They need each other. It's about survival. Like in a battle, if you're in numbers, then you can strategize better, then you can save yourself, and then you can hunt better. So for them, protecting the unit means their own survival. So I think a lot of people go into the emotional level and say, oh, they love each other, they're brother and sister. It doesn't matter who they are. It's just about we need to protect what's ours. Like when the enemy's gone, then we can sort out our differences here. I think that's the thing that a lot of people gravitate to dogs because they think it's beautiful. At the same time, when they come into the pack, they don't understand that there's a lot of primal practices between them. They will absolutely hurt each other if it comes to that. They will kill each other if it comes to that. So it's very primal, but yes, they will defend their unit in front of an enemy.
These pack dynamics, do you think they explain behaviors such as trekking all the way back home from thousands of miles away, or saving a baby when the house is on fire, or because such things have been documented? That has to do with pack dynamics?
I think they are very pack driven, very much so. So they have very clear references of places, people, and individuals that they consider to be part of their own pack unit. So dogs that grow up in family dynamics with children in between, if they're raised properly, absolutely they will defend everybody. And this is another argument that a lot of people in dog training have. They think there are training for defense, like a lot of people do protection training, but a dog that's really confident and has that drive, you don't need to train him. He'll do it naturally. It's just he has to be very confident to do that, but he will protect his unit in his own way if the situation arises.
So if there's a baby at risk, the house is on fire, the dog would save the baby because the baby belongs to the pack.
He's part of the pack. The dog will try to get him out. Yes, if this is a dog with strong nerves, which we call them strong nerves, or is confident enough, because I think one of the things in the human element, if you get 100 people, you're probably going to get 3 or 4 people that are really confident. Yeah. Everybody else is just going to be a follower or not going to be sure enough. It's not different in dogs. So you're going to have those dogs that are going to be able to take on the difficult challenges. The other ones are just going to be around it and make sure everything's okay, but they're not going to be the one to jump into the fire. But yes, they will do that. And I think it's kind of like the same with places. A lot of dogs get lost. I've seen that, and they can find their way back home if they're in the vicinity or they're familiar with the territory. But yes, that is true.
Apropos territory, dogs are supposed to be territorial.
Yes.
And you've just said about 5 minutes ago that if you were to transfer a dog from one family to another, or from one unit to another, whatever, from one owner to another, they adopt, they adjust. How do they give up on the previous territory so easily?
It depends it depends on how it's raised. If you raise a dog right,
it's your territory, not theirs. Of course, they're going to recognize as the territory that they inhabit, but if you raise them right, they're going to understand that at the end of the day, it's yours. But let's say the dog is raised very wildly. People don't put in enough rules, just leave him be, and he takes over the territory is his. But the owner dies. Somebody has to take that dog out of that place, ship it somewhere else. It's going to try to adapt and adjust, and he's probably going to try to take over the next territory that he's put in, because they do migrate. So it's not willingly sometimes, but they do it for survival. Remember, it's all about survival. The owner's not there, territory's left, somebody took him out of there, out of against his will. He just has to try to make it better somewhere else.
Why would he protect the territory that belongs to you? Why would the dog protect the territory? Why would it fight burglars?
In my job as a dog trainer, I always tell people that this is not the dog's job. It's my job. Now, a lot of people don't agree with me because you can't put a dog. A lot of people want a dog to protect their territory. The challenge is when the dogs are all or nothing. If I give the dog the territory to protect, I'm giving him everything. I'm giving him the top position in this hierarchy. And it's not just the territory, he gets to decide everything. Who comes in, who comes out, who gets the food. He can come at me if I challenge him. And this is something that doesn't work for domestic dogs. If you want to live in a dog in an apartment like I am, I can't just give that to them, because otherwise I can't get any visitors here. I can't do anything. Delivery people are going to get bit. So you have to protection training usually, which is not my field. I don't do protection work, but protection dogs have to learn the middle ground. It's very difficult because dogs do not, they don't have multicolor world. It's just black and white. It's either I'm the leader or you are. You defend me or I defend you. So the in between is very difficult for them. That's why a lot of people that want to dabble in protection, they don't do it right. Eventually, the dog will hurt somebody because they don't know how to define that.
If I pick up a puppy and raise it, it's not going to naturally protect me and my territory. I have to raise it to protect me and my territory.
Depends. You might have a dog with weak nerves. Which we would consider in the human world, a person that's not very confident, a shy person, no, somebody that doesn't see himself as ready enough to do that kind of work. That dog is not going to perform well if you allow that dog to take on that role. He's not going to know what to do. He's going to get nervous. He's going to bite the wrong person. He's going to bark too much. He's going to be too agitated. In a sense, if you want a dog to protect you, the dog has to have a lot of skills. He has to be silent. He has to be confident. If danger is coming towards him, he cannot freak out and be like, somebody's coming. So a weak nerve dog, if you put him in that position, he's just gonna put you at double risk. Mm-hmm. So it's not every dog is equipped for that. That's why they need a unit. That's why a lot of them are not. Most of them are going to be behind. When I say behind, is there's going to be a couple of dogs that are going to know exactly what to do, and the other ones are just going to help them.
Right.
But some of the back dogs that we call them, some of these dogs are just alert dogs. They are dogs that are just going to be surrounding the area and going to come back and say, "Hey, there's something on that side. Go over there and try to fix it for me." But he's just going to be that dog. Right. So there's a lot of elements that make a good pack, but not every single dog will be able to perform that. That's why we have to recognize who they are, and understanding the kind of dog you have will kind of define what kind of future you're going to have with that dog. And when you match dogs with people, you have to understand both, because a lot of people, unfortunately, they get dogs with very strong nerves and are very weak people. So this is what happens. The dog takes over everything. Mm-hmm. And then that person's life they become a hostage of the dog. Now they cannot go anywhere. The dog is the one that defines even the walking path. The dog doesn't want to go right. Person goes left. So it's kind of like the same thing that you see in what we call toxic relationships. It's just the person is completely taken over by that relationship. Now, I've met people that quit having relationships, quit dating, quit receiving guests. I heard so many crazy stories about people that gave up everything for their dogs, like sleeping in the bed. I had a friend that broke up her relationship with her boyfriend because he wanted to have sex with her. She didn't want the dog to be out of the room. And he said, I'm not comfortable. I don't feel comfortable with this. The animal is here. And she's like, well, but she sleeps here every night. He's like, yeah, but I just need a few minutes. And she's like, no, I want the dog. So you see what I mean? Like, I heard stories like that from men and women. So it's not a gender thing. A lot of people get into relationships with dogs in a way trying to replace something that didn't work in the human world. My relationships with humans didn't work. I don't trust humans anymore. Humans are all bad. Dogs are all good. Doesn't matter how crazy things they do in my house, they're never going to leave because in a way, even if you get a German Shepherd and he's in your house, he's a hostage to you. Now he can't leave you, so there's no abandonment anymore. It doesn't matter if my life is a mess. I got somebody now. So this is one of the dysfunctions that happens in the dog training world because we go into these people's homes and we expect to see a healthy thing going on with the dog, and it's not there. It's not there. The dog became a replacement for relationships that in the human realm did not work. That's one of the reasons why I started to study this, because a lot of dog trainers kept saying, well, maybe we need to suggest that our clients go see a therapist. I said, sure, I understand that, but I want to understand that too, because I want to do my job in a better way. I want to see the signs right when I get in. And the first sign, which was the first thing that caught my eye, was that detachment from reality. I started to see people not really looking into the reality of the fact with the dog and say, oh, no, that's fine. This is just like, he doesn't bite anybody. It's okay. He's just in a bad mood today. You know, the same thing that we see victims of, for example, narcissistic abuse, that they keep validating and justifying all the bad things that the partner does simply because they just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with the reality, which is, in the case of a dog, I have to fix this. I have to do it different. They don't want to lose that illusion of the perfect relationship.
Yeah, very interesting. There's been a steep rise in pet ownership.
Yes.
Especially cats, but second place is dogs. Why do you think that is? You mentioned one reason. These are substitute relationships.
Yes.
Far less complex because you can idealize the pet. The pet. You can generalize the pet. You can say all dogs are the same, and they're all wonderful. So, and then it makes it a lot easier to manage the relationship because you're essentially having a relationship with yourself. But I think there may be another reason, and I would like to get your input on this. At the same time that there's a steep rise in pet ownership, there's an even steeper rise in the rates of narcissism in the general population. So it would seem that narcissists would get on well with pets because they're both transactional. They speak the same language, basically, language of interrelationship, interpersonal relation. So then they can understand each other easily. I mean, dogs, as you describe them, have a narcissistic mindset, not in the grandiose sense. They don't think they're God, but they're transactional, and they are not very emotional. They're hypo-emotional, and they're very territorial, protective of territory, and they establish hierarchies, and all these are very common among narcissists. These are narcissistic behaviors, definitely. And so I think the more narcissistic people become, the easier they feel about owning a pet, because it's the kind of relationship they can make sense of. They can't make head or tails of relationships with other people, but they can fully understand a dog or a cat. I mean,
on a superficial level, yes.
Yeah.
They think it's that easy because what makes them gravitate to dogs or cats or any kind of pets is that it's that I don't have to give myself too much. I don't have to put in a lot of effort. He's just going to be here. People are difficult. I have to understand them, deal with their emotions, cater to their needs. Dogs are and animals are not going to be like that. I'm just going to have them here, give me everything I want, and I really don't have to do much back. This is their superficial idea of that relationship.
This is maternal unconditional love.
Yes.
Narcissists generally seek maternal unconditional love. They're trying to coerce the intimate partner to provide unconditional love. And they do it by testing the partner. They abuse the partner, they traumatize the partner, they cheat on the partner. And it's like a kid who says, now let's see if mommy really loves me. I'm going to misbehave, I'm going to throw a temper tantrum, I'm going to destroy the whole house, and let's see if mother will stick around. Let's see if she abandons me. If she abandons me, that means she was a bad mother to start with. If she sticks around, if she stays despite everything I'm doing, then probably it means that she's a good mother who is capable of providing unconditional love that is not conditioned on performance. And so I think the same relationship is with pets. Like pets provide you with, dogs provide you with unconditional love. That's what you believe, yeah? You convince yourself.
Well, I
love is
think
unconditional.
People think that that's what they're going to get from dogs, but that's just not true.
Yeah, they idealize the dog. Absolutely.
Yeah, they idealize the dog.
The same way they idealize the intimate partner.
Yeah.
This is a shared fantasy. What you have with a pet is a shared fantasy. You love bomb the pet, you idealize the pet, then you expect unconditional love from the pet. And so it's a shared fantasy. Only this particular shared fantasy can last forever, because a pet is incapable of essentially pushing back or talking back or arguing with you or criticizing you, disagreeing with you as a narcissist and so on. So it's the ideal partner. And
let me tell you this. This is interesting that you touch on that, because the cycle, idealization, devaluation, and discard also happens in the pet world, because after the shared fantasy is created and they bring the dog in, now they're going to start seeing, I think it's crazy because it's the same process. Now the dog peed on your carpet, peed on your bed, barked at the neighbor, started doing, now he's not perfect anymore. Now they want that internal object, like you say all the time, that they created that snapshot of a dog in their heads, but the dog in reality now is creating chaos in their lives. So it's very common in our world to see people get a dog, and the dog doesn't last a year because it becomes a problem. Now they give the dog away and they get another dog and another dog and another dog. Literally the exact same process as you see the narcissist doing with their intimate partner.
They devalue the dog and discard the dog. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And relationship with the cats are very interesting, because with dogs what you have is a shared fantasy. Obviously, you idealize the dog, and then if the dog turns out to be unruly or somehow independent-minded, if you wish, have a personality of its own, would not succumb to all your wishes immediately, and so on and so forth, then you would devalue the dog and discard the dog, as you would with an intimate partner. With a cat, it's a lot more elaborate, I think, because cats, it's difficult to idealize cats. And cats, people don't really idealize cats. They admit that cats are psychopathic, they are self-centered, they are, so there's no bonding here in the dog sense.
Yeah.
I think with cats, you have the exact opposite dynamic. You have submission.
Yes.
It's a submissive relationship, where the cat is most definitely the ruler. The cat rules the roost. Cat rules the territory. And the owner of the cat is at the disposal of the cat. Is a servant to the cat.
Yeah.
It's a codependent relationship, actually, with the cat.
What I see, I've met people that had dogs and cats. The cat absolutely runs the house entirely, and the cat sometimes is the only individual in the household that can actually discipline the dog.
Yeah.
Now, I've also seen, because I know you talk a lot about stages, right? A narcissist can be psychopathic at times. He can be borderline at times. And this is another question that I have for you: is the dynamic between two narcissists? Because I see them modifying or being in different positions in the dog world. I've seen that sometimes because they don't want to, because a lot of people do devalue and discard the dog really quickly in a year. But some people they don't want to be alone, right? Because we know they all the cluster B suffer from that. So because they don't want to go through, if they discard the dog, now they don't have anybody. So what can I do to avoid the devaluation and discard? I have to switch reality. I have to switch roles. And to a certain extent, they become more submissive. So how does that play out? I know it's not a straight line of behavior. They fluctuate, but I have seen that also. Some people that are usually some of these people, they can be actually quite rude and to a certain extent antisocial in a human world, yet you're completely submissive to the dog. It's almost like two sides of a coin. It's like in the dog relationship, they are like doormats. Literally, the dog does whatever he wants with
and
that
I think
person.
it's even more common with cats. I've had the opportunity to observe people with cats from up close, and I've never come across an owner of a cat who dominated the cat. I've never come across a single case. And I think definitely it's a submissive codependent relationship. The transitions between cluster B, and not only cluster B, the transitions between personality disorders, because a narcissist, for example, could become a paranoid. And paranoid personality disorder is not cluster B, it's another cluster. So the transition between personality disorders, that many narcissists become schizoid. Schizoid personality disorder is cluster C. It's when the narcissist cannot obtain supply, a state known as narcissistic collapse, and the narcissist starts to avoid the world, to withdraw, and then isolates himself and begins to self-supply and so on. So for all intents and purposes, develops schizoid personality disorder. So these transitions are because personality disorders defend against other personality disorders. So in life, typically you start with the equivalent of borderline personality disorder as a child. You're emotionally dysregulated, you're a bit morbid. Suicidal ideation is pretty common among in this age group and so on. It's all an outcome of dysfunctional households, abusive and traumatizing or otherwise negligent and so on. But also households that idolize and pedestalize the child, households that instrumentalize the child, parentify the child, any mistreatment of the child, any wrong upbringing leads to ultimately, in a minority of the children, luckily, leads to the emergence of a personality disorder. But the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the book you use in the United States, is 20 to 25 years behind the current knowledge. It's an antiquated book, absolutely wrong on. Whereas we have a much better diagnostic book called the ICD, the International Classification of Diseases, where there are no personality disorders, no differential diagnosis. What you have is a list of traits. And then like Lego, you combine the traits to get a specific idiosyncratic profile of an individual. So if you take antagonism and dissociality and anankastia, you get anankastia is compulsion obsession. So if you combine these three, you get the equivalent of a narcissist. But it's not called narcissist, it's like the equivalent of a narcissist. And this is a much more realistic view of humanity. We're in flux. We're constantly flowing between states. The child begins with a borderline state and then to defend against the borderline state because emotional dysregulation is unbearable, it's intolerable. So to defend against it is also frightening. The child develops narcissistic defenses. So every narcissist has a borderline template, a borderline foundation. Otto Kernberg, the father of the field, suggested that narcissism is a defense against borderline, and I fully agree.
Yeah.
So here's one example where we cannot say someone has narcissistic personality disorder. It goes hand in hand with a borderline foundation. And when this narcissist is confronted with stress, anxiety, humiliation, shaming, narcissistic injury, and above all, mortification. In other words, being shamed and humiliated abruptly, especially in public. When all these happen, the defenses of the narcissist crumble. And what's left is the infantile foundation of borderline. And the narcissist becomes indistinguishable clinically from a borderline. He begins to emotionally dysregulate, he develops suicidal ideation, mood disorders such as depression, which are very common in borderline, and so on and so forth, becomes a borderline. And then if the narcissist cannot secure supply, a regular, uninterrupted flow of quality narcissistic supply, attention, adulation, admiration, whatever, then he becomes a schizoid. And if the narcissist cannot obtain supply, sometimes the solution is to become a paranoid. Because when you're paranoid, you're at the center of a malevolent conspiracy. You're very important. It is a self-aggrandizing posture. Paranoids are very grandiose because they think they matter. They think they're important. The CIA is after me. I mean, look at me.
Yes, I've seen that. Yes.
It's show off. It's show off. It's a look at me posture. So this is also a solution in narcissism. So it's absolutely counterfactual, not to say stupid, to insist that the personality disorders are demarcated. They are differential diagnoses. That is completely untrue.
Yeah, the paranoid part of it is very true. I've come across people. I mean, I'm nobody to diagnose anybody, but I've seen that play out. All of a sudden, there's a paranoia there, and everybody's after me. Everybody's out to attack me, and you just put it perfectly. It brings that supply back to them.
Yes,
it's all of a sudden I'm the most important person. That's why everybody's after me. Yes,
this is called self-supply. When you can't obtain the supply in the outside world, you supply yourself. You become your own, I call it self-audiencing. You become your own audience. And one of the major self-supply solutions is paranoia.
Oh
if you convince yourself that everyone is after you, or some group is conspiring against you, or whatever, it's narcissistic supply because you're at the center of attention. You're in the limelight.
This is so. You know what? This is so perfect because in the dog training world, after the digital era, a lot of people started putting out content. I mean, I've had my YouTube channel for 10 years. A lot of people started posting, their training videos and stuff, all that stuff online. And obviously, when you start to do that, you expose yourself. So now you're talking openly about how you're training a dog and you're showing all that stuff. And there's always a divide, or some people are going to be against discipline or against punishment, blah, 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 all that stuff that you know about. And you see kind of like a trend in the dog, which is everywhere, but in the dog training world, it happens this way. They put out videos purposely, kind of overboard, too much. We know the information. I've always been very open about what I post online, and I'm very transparent. But some people kind of push that boundary to a point where he's going to get a backlash. And that becomes that supply.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I'm in the center of attention. Everybody's attacking me. Look at me. All these people trying to disrupt me. Blah blah blah. My God!
Being provocative is a way to elicit narcissistic supply from the environment, of course.
And you know what I hear?
Being obnoxious.
They act. Some of these people, the younger generation especially, they actually came to me and say, "Oh, I don't like that stuff when it's too boring. I like to post stuff that's provocative." They come out and they just say it to you. They really, I mean, it took me a long time to understand this process, and you helped me a lot because I always heard you say they show you who they are. in a way, they do show you, if you pay attention, if you know what to look
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
In the beginning is right there. You see that they gravitate to that space of chaotic conversations all the time, especially online. They gravitate to that. If everything is stable and it's just boring, they just don't want to be there. And this brings me to another question that I want to ask you, because
But I haven't
hear.
answered your first one.
Oh,
Would
I'm
you like
sorry.
to answer your first one? It's up to you.
Yes, please. I'm sorry.
You're in the driver's seat. I've learned to keep my word with dog trainers. I mean, I don't want them on my wrong side. Yeah. So, reality. You asked about reality.
Yes.
What is this concept of detachment from reality? You can't wrap your mind around it, and so on and so forth. And you can't wrap your mind around it because you're embedded in reality. Here I'm a bit of an iconoclast and a bit off the mainstream. What I'm about to say is not the mainstream.
Okay.
I believe that to remain immersed in reality, to remain embedded in reality, to be able to continuously interact with reality, you need to invest a lot of energy. It's an energy-consuming enterprise. It doesn't come naturally. I disagree that it comes naturally. You have to filter out a lot of information, so you have to be highly selective. Then you have to frame this information within theories of the minds of other people. This process is known as mentalization, what makes other people tick. Theories about the world, theories about relationships. You have many, many theories. You're like a huge university internally. You have many theories. And these theories are known as internal working models. That internal working models, these theories, require maintenance, investment, and application. You need to apply these theories all the time. It's a hugely time and energy consuming process. When you're exposed to stress, anxiety, when you feel threatened, even when people disagree with you vocally and vociferously and ostentatiously, when you're humiliated and shamed, in short, when you experience what we call in psychology dissonance, your energy levels drop. You allocate energy to cope with the emergency, with the exigency, and you're left with very little energy. And because you're left with little residual energy, you can no longer maintain the models that allow you to interact with reality, allow you to remain in reality. As long as everything goes smoothly, relatively smoothly, of course, as long as, there are hiccups here and there, but more or less everything is okay, you have a lot of energy available, and you deploy this energy in activating and operating your internal working models so that you're able to cope and exist in and subsist in the world, in reality. But when you're in bad shape, this no longer works. Energy is finite. The energy you have is finite. So it no longer works. You simply don't have enough energy. At that point, your perception of reality is going to like flicker, on the old televisions, black and white,
right?
When you have this flicker, your perception of reality is going to begin to flicker. You're going to gradually lose touch with reality. We don't perceive reality as it is. We perceive reality as it is processed through our models, internal models.
Okay.
And if these internal models are deactivated owing to a lack of energy, then you don't perceive reality. End of story. What you do perceive at that point is the internal dissonance or the internal conflicts. And this is the permanent state of the narcissist. Because a narcissist has to invest huge amounts of energy in maintaining a self-concept, a self-image, or a self-perception that has nothing to do with reality, that is grandiose and inflated and delusional and counterfactual and frankly crazy. To maintain this self-perception or self-concept, we call it self-concept, to maintain this self-concept, the narcissist invests every grain, every watt, and every element of energy that he has. It consumes everything. it leaves no energy for any other task, not for relationships, not for reality, not for anything. The narcissist constantly scans for insults and slights and challenges and attacks and disagreements and criticism that may undermine the grandiose, counterfactual, delusional self-concept. And that's a full-time job. There's no time left or energy left for anything, not even for other people, not for reality. So the narcissist solution is to say, I don't have energy to cope with external reality, and I don't have energy to cope with external people, external objects. External objects means people out there. I don't have any of this because I'm very busy maintaining this totally delusional, crazy view of myself. And I'm very fragile. And if I were to fail in this, I would fall apart. I would crumble. So I need to do this. Like, this is the core of my existence. Okay. I don't have energy to cope with external objects, with other people. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to convert them into internal objects. As internal objects, they are anyhow part of the scenery. They're anyhow part of my mind, which is the recipient of all my energy. Similarly, I can't cope with reality because it requires a lot of energy. So I'm going to pretend that reality is not real and there's no need to invest any energy in it. Instead, I'm going to create a fantasy within my mind. And again, it's a figment of my mind, an element, an ingredient, a component of my mind. And all my energy goes towards sustaining my mind. So anyhow, it's going to benefit from the allocation of energy. It's simply an allocation problem. Okay. And so everything happens inside the mind of the narcissist. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens externally. And in this sense, and I'm about to finish, I see that you're impatient, but in this...
No, I'm just because I want you to continue that.
No, I'm verbose. I'm verbose. I tend to I love the sound of my voice. What can I do? So, and this leads to what we call a paracosm, which is an alternative reality, a virtual reality within which the narcissist exists, and only within which the narcissist feels alive or feels that outside of it, the narcissist feels dead. Now, this is very, very reminiscent of another type of mental health disorders known as psychotic disorders. This is a form of psychosis. Because what happens in psychosis? A psychotic person, what happens? The psychotic has a voice in his mind. There's a voice in his mind. He says, it's not in my mind. It's coming from the outside. The psychotic has an image, sees something in his mind's eye. He says, it's not inside my head. I can see it. It's out there. So the psychotic confuses the internal space with the external space, which is exactly what happens to the narcissist. The narcissist confuses the external space with the internal space. It's the opposite direction of psychosis. Psychosis is from the inside out, and the narcissist is from the outside in, but the confusion is the same. And that's why Otto Kernberg, the aforementioned Otto Kernberg, suggested that narcissism is a form of pseudo-psychosis, almost psychosis. It's a very, very, very serious mental illness. People think that to be a narcissist is to be an a-hole or an obnoxious person. That's not the core of narcissism. That has actually little to do with narcissism, because many narcissists are charming and very manipulative. That's not narcissism. Narcissism is possibly the second most egregious and dangerous and destructive mental illness after schizophrenia. It's that bad. It's that bad. And people don't realize it. They team up with narcissists, they sleep with narcissists, they create couples with narcissists, they have children with narcissists. And think, as a narcissist, he's just a bit arrogant and a bit insensitive and a bit obnoxious. What to do? Everyone has idiosyncrasies. Everyone is special in some way. So that's his specialty. He's a pleasant person. It's not about that. He's a seriously mentally ill person and dangerous in this sense.
This is so profound because from I've met people like that before, and in the beginning, it's just like you said. You think, oh, it's just a weird guy. It's just a weird person that's just a little bit rude or a little bit unpleasant. But the closer you get to these people, you start to understand that there's really something deeper than that. And the question I was going to follow up is that the reason why some of them or a lot of them display depression, and they go through these cycles of I've heard some of them go, at least they say, I'm super depressed, and then all of a sudden they go through this cycles of they just don't want to be with anybody else, and they just down all the time, they feel bad all the time. Is that a state that they go through? Because what you just described is unbearable. It's just putting all that in to maintain that image and not having energy for anything else. Does that really what's behind the characteristics that they display, which is they start a lot of things, they don't finish anything, they start a bunch of projects, they don't finish anything, they don't last in jobs and in relationships and friendships. Everything is it's constantly being recycled and recreated. I can only imagine how much effort that you have to put in to be constantly going through the motions. And is that why they become depressed all the time, or is there a perpetual state of depression behind that?
First of all, before we proceed, on the other hand, I don't want to exaggerate the number of narcissists. You would find online nonsense like 16% of all people are narcissists, 1 of 6, and other such nonsense. We should distinguish between people with narcissistic personality disorder, which are the people I'm talking about, and only about them. I'm not referring to other types of people. And people with a narcissistic style. These are people who are a-holes and jerks and obnoxious and disempathic and insensitive and exploitative and envious and everything, but they're not narcissists. They don't have this devastation of the inner landscape. They don't have this wasteland between their ears. They have a self, they're embedded in reality, they perform, and they do have a modicum of empathy, emotional empathy, affective empathy, and so on. But they have a narcissistic style. They're not someone you would like to have a beer with in a pub or, date maybe. And the third category is what is known as dark personalities, dark triad and dark tetrad personalities, which are not narcissists and they're not psychopaths. Again, if you go online, I was shocked to see people with PhDs in psychology spewing nonsense and saying the dark triad is narcissist plus psychopath. No, they're not. They are subclinical. In other words, these are people who cannot be diagnosed with narcissism or with psychopathy, but they have a combination of a narcissistic style, psychopathic style, and Machiavellianism, and sometimes sadism. So these are different groups, and you can't generalize from one to the other. And I focus entirely on the first group, people with narcissistic personality disorder. These are the mentally ill people. And they are anywhere between 1 to 3% of the general population. Even in studies, regrettably, studies that I read and review, the wannabe scholars who author the studies confuse the three groups egregiously. So it's a mess out there. Second comment I'd like to make, half of all narcissists are women. We used to think that women in the 1980s and up to the year 2000, more or less, we used to believe that 75% of people with narcissistic personality disorder are men. And there was a reason for that, because narcissism is very manly, it's very masculine. It's about competitiveness, it's about ruthlessness and callousness and ambition and envy. And these are male things, used to be at least. But today we know that the number is probably evenly divided and that women are underdiagnosed for cultural reasons, cultural and social reasons. We don't expect women to be narcissists, so we diagnose them with borderline. Similarly, in borderline, the division is half and half. Only we don't expect men to be emotionally dysregulated. So we say, oh, it's not emotional dysregulation, it's a narcissist. So, but it's half and half. Coming back to your question, after this long detour, but essential detour, I think, to dispel some myths. There was a school in clinical psychology a while back, like a few decades ago, that suggested that narcissistic personality disorder is indeed a reaction to depression. It's a form of depressive disorder. There was a school. It's no longer accepted. But it is true that narcissists react with mood disorders, especially depression, but not only depression. For example, there is something called narcissistic elation, which is a form of euphoria. And so if you need to compare narcissism to any mood disorder, the closest would be bipolar.
Okay.
They kind of oscillate between a manic phase where they can do no wrong and they're amazing and they are the top of the world and they're going to conquer the universe. And so that's a manic phase where they come up with harebrained schemes that never mature and never, end anywhere. And they constantly change jobs and wives and girlfriends and boyfriends and you name it. And they're all over the place. And so this is the manic phase in narcissism. And then definitely you have the depressive phase, where the narcissist becomes, as I've said earlier several times, a schizoid. In other words, avoidant. The narcissist withdraws from the world, isolates himself or herself, and constricts his or her life. So, and this is a reaction to failure to obtain supply, narcissistic supply, and that is known as narcissistic collapse. Or having been shamed and humiliated abruptly, especially in public, and this is known as narcissistic mortification, or having been challenged and criticized or disagreed with, and that is known as narcissistic injury. So in all these three conditions, if they're sufficiently harsh and severe, or if they're sufficiently regular, the narcissist would withdraw from the world, isolate himself in order to avoid further damage to the fragile structure, the house of cards, the precarious balance that passes for personality with the narcissist. So, yes, depression is an integral part of narcissism, but also you have mania. You have mania of depression also. So, and I think we failed until very recently. We failed to grasp this dimension of narcissism. The effect of mood disorders on the narcissist's conduct, emotions, cognitions was very, very neglected. You can't find anything about mood disorders such as depression in the literature, even the primary literature, such as, for example, Freud or Kohut or Kernberg even, or you can't find anything. There's no mention of depression or anything. The first time depression made its entrance was in the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, where they finally accepted that narcissists are not happy-go-lucky all the time, that they are not what we call egosyntonic, happy with who they are, comfortable in their own skin all the time, and that there are vast, long periods of time where they are extremely unhappy and dysphoric and, want to die and suicidal ideation sometimes and so on. So we're beginning to create a much more nuanced view of pathological narcissism than we had only 20 years ago. Much more nuanced view. For example, the whole concept of covert narcissism, vulnerable, fragile, shy narcissist, is relatively new. It was first suggested in the 80s, which is pretty new. Take into account that pathological narcissism, was first described in 1897 by Havelock Ellis. That's like 130 years ago.
Yes.
And yet the first time we had an inkling of covert narcissism was only 40 years ago. Like 90 years, we didn't get it. The 90 years, we didn't get it. That there are narcissists who are actually very shy and terrified of like the equivalent of social anxiety, and that they're very passive aggressive and they're very envious and they're seething with resentment for having failed to secure supply. They're in a constant state of collapse and they are therefore depressed all the time and so on. We've completely failed to isolate this variant of narcissism. And so the field is in my view still adolescent. I don't feel that we know everything there is to know. Extremely powerful.
I think it's, as somebody from the outside trying to understand, I think right now whoever jumps on the internet will find just about everything, just about every opinion, because it became also a trend. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody has a different point of view. There's a lot of narcissists online with their own channels and talking about their own experiences. For covert narcissists, there's another, like, it's a separate trend. A lot of people talk about that, and in some of the discussion forums. And I think there are generic explanations, but I always came back to you because you're the only one that really made me understand in detail what this means.
I was the first. I opened the first website on narcissistic personality disorder. I started my work in the 80s. I opened the first website in the 90s and I published my book in the first edition in 1999. When I came on the scene, there was nobody else. And there was nobody else for 10 years. Like I've been alone for 10 years. And I opened all the major support groups, the first support groups ever, by myself, 6 of them over this period of 10 years. And I had to invent a whole new language because there was no language to describe any of this. Narcissistic abuse is a phrase that I coined. Somatic narcissists, cerebral narcissists, you name it. I mean, 90%, not 100, but 90% of the language in use today, that includes hoovering, flying monkeys and so on, was invented by me. So
I always go back to your material because I think it's the most rich.
I simply have a much longer experience, much longer view, and unfortunately, what I see today online is a corruption of the field completely. It's and I'm very unhappy with it. Very unhappy. I would generalize and say that something like 95% of the information online is nonsense, is rubbish, is misinformation, and I'm very unhappy with that. It's a huge problem.
I think there is a way to market everything and people just jump on and they see a possibility of reach and money grabbing stuff, and that's what they go in for, unfortunately. But I want to ask you something about that the dynamic between two narcissists. I hear a lot of people say that it's impossible for two narcissists to maintain a relationship long term. But at the same time, I also heard you say I was watching one of these your videos last night. You're talking about the contagious effect of being around a narcissist. So which one would be the correct statement or close to correct statement? Maybe two narcissists cannot sustain a long-term relationship. However, a narcissist is going to, in a sense, contaminate the other person and make that other person, to a certain extent, his mirror, or become a narcissist in a way in order for them to sustain that relationship long-term. Because I kind of see couples that I've been around couples that when they started, I kind of figured let's say the guy was narcissistic, and I see the complete transformation of the person long term. Like after 4, 5, 6 years, you see that woman become just like him. Yeah. And to the point that you say, which one is the original narcissist? Where did it start? Because as of right now, I just can't tell. It's almost like they became the same. On the outside, you see that it's almost like a theater, because in between them is very dry. There's really not much going on between them. You can tell if you go to their home and you be around them too much, you can tell they're completely separate individuals. There's no intimacy. There's nothing there. Like you say, it's an absence, like on both sides. Now it's not a presence. It's an absence. It's a double absence. So how did that play out? Is it possible for two original narcissists to gravitate to each other and be around them forever? Or, I mean, long term? Or what we see is the effect of contagion?
Two narcissists of the same kind cannot coexist. It's a train wreck. So, for example, Donald Trump and Elon Musk will not last long.
Oh, yes. I agree with you.
These are two narcissists of the same kind. They are known as overt, grandiose narcissists. In the case of Elon Musk, he's probably also a sadist, but in the case of Donald Trump, it's only overt, grandiose narcissism. And they will not last long. Similarly, two covert narcissists will not last long. Two somatic narcissists will not last long. Two cerebral narcissists will compete for narcissistic supply. I'm more intelligent than you. No, I'm more intelligent, and so on. So the general rule is two narcissists of the same type is a train wreck waiting to happen. But two narcissists of different types can and do survive in long-term relationships, sometimes very happily. So, for example, if you have an overt, grandiose narcissist and what is known as an inverted narcissist, it's another phrase I coined. An inverted narcissist is a type of a covert narcissist. And what she does, she obtains her supply from the primary, the main narcissist in the relationship. So the main narcissist, the overt, grandiose narcissist in the couple is, for example, very famous, is a celebrity. And so his wife, who is an inverted narcissist, also a narcissist, she would get her supply from the fact that she is his wife.
Oh, okay.
You get it? It's like in Germany in the 19th century, when you were married to a medical doctor, they called you Frau Doktor. I mean, you could have been a cleaning lady, but you were Frau Doktor. So this is vicarious supply by proxy, you know.
Yeah.
That's an example of a relationship that has the longevity, vitality. The members of the dyad, the members of the couple feed each other. The primary overt grandiose narcissist is out there harvesting narcissistic supply, eliciting and generating and garnering it, brings it home, and then his partner, who is an inverted narcissist, essentially a covert narcissist, consumes this supply, and she has her supply, and he has his supply, and it's the same supply. It's the same supply. So that's an example. Another example is a cerebral narcissist having a committed relationship with a somatic narcissist. The cerebral narcissist is asexual, completely uninterested in sex. Whereas the somatic narcissist can think of nothing else but sex. And it fits the cerebral, because the cerebral doesn't want to provide the somatic narcissist with sex. He finds it, a waste of time, or is asexual. So he says, great, she can find sex elsewhere. That's wonderful. I'm off the hook here. So
this is something that I want to ask. I'm sorry to interrupt, because this is very interesting. I've noticed that trend too. Is that in the mind of a cerebral narcissist, is he really okay with the fact that his counterpart is going to be sexually satisfied by somebody else, as long as it doesn't cause a narcissistic injury or mortification for him socially?
The only time the cerebral would feel very bad about this is if his partner were to compare him unfavorably to her lover. So she would say, wow, the new guy I'm with, the new guy I'm having sex with is even more intelligent than you are. Wow, that's narcissistic injury. Then the cerebral narcissist would put his foot down and terminate the relationship. Her relationship. But otherwise, it's a maintenance chore. And the narcissist, the cerebral narcissist, is very happy to outsource it. No problem there. You know?
Oh, it's funny because I read in some of these forums of online a lot of women and even men talking about their experiences with cerebral narcissists in the life without intimacy, completely. Like people that go through years and years in a marriage or a relationship, and there's no intimacy at all.
Yeah.
I'm not even just talking about sex itself. I'm talking about touch and conversations and anything that resembles intimacy is completely out the window. It's just not there.
Yeah.
And it's very crushing. I mean, destroying to these people that they're just it completely invalidates the person on the other side because they go through all those stages. They feel rejected and they feel worthless, and it takes a long time. Some of these people never really recover. The longer they stay in a relationship like that, they just go for the rest of their lives in therapy trying to figure this out. What did I do? When the fact of the matter, it's got nothing to do with you. It's just the narcissist just doesn't. They just don't feel like you said, it's a chore. It's something that they just don't want to be bothered with, right? They just want to be there. This was always a question of mine. Like, how can this be? How can you be in a marriage or in a committed relationship? You just want to be. That's all. That's all there is. You just want to be. You just want to. The world knows that I'm okay. It's a defense, social defense to a certain extent.
The intimate partner does not exist. She is not an external object, as I said. She's internalized. She's an internal object. And then the intimate partner becomes a potential threat, because the minute the intimate partner is introjected, the minute she is internalized, the minute the narcissist creates a representation of the external intimate partner in his mind, the narcissist prefers to continue to interact with the internal object. And then the external object becomes a threat because she may deviate from the internal object. She may diverge from the internal object. She may challenge the internal object. She may disagree with the internal object. She is independent. She has her own friends and family. She makes decisions. She has her own job. She travels. In all these cases, it's a reminder that she is not the internal object. So she's threatening the inner balance of the narcissist. From the moment the partner has been introjected, which is about after 10 minutes, from that moment on, the intimate partner is a nuisance, not to say a threat. And to manage the intimate partner, I'm referring to the real intimate partner, the external object. To manage her, the narcissist resorts to a variety of strategies. He tries to subdue her. He tries to annihilate her or eliminate her as an agent. He tries to take away her agency. He tries to outsource her. You go find your sex and whatever outside. Don't bother me with this. And so on and so forth. So there's a variety of strategies. And they're all intended to preserve the integrity of the shared fantasy by keeping the internal object as close to the external object as possible. This fails, of course. Of course it fails. And then it leads to devaluation and discard, which is exactly what the shared fantasy is all about. It's about getting rid of the intimate partner.
Now, speaking of the shared fantasy, I know it's a cycle, right? It happens all the time. Now, I've seen a lot of people talk about the discard is not necessarily a physical discard, especially when we talk about the social dynamics. I mean, the narcissist needs to portray a social image, a specific image, and being sometimes married secures that. So is it true that they can actually discard a person completely and still be married to her?
As I just said, narcissists do not relate to external objects. So whether you're there physically or not, one of the dogs, whether you are there physically or not is besides the point. The important discard takes place in the narcissist's mind. The narcissist discards the internal object. And then if the external object resists or objects or protests, then there's a need to get rid of the external object as well. But if the external object is compliant and submissive and collusive, collaborates with a charade, then the narcissist devalues the internal object and continues to coexist or cohabit with the external object. Anyhow, she has never existed as an external object. Doesn't matter. That's what victims fail to understand.
Yeah.
They were never relevant. They were never relevant.
Yeah.
The narcissist did not choose them.
Yeah.
Because they were amazing and kind and nice and empathetic, and it's complete nonsense. They were not chosen. They were there and they were available to collaborate in the formation of the shared fantasy, and they provided the narcissist with the 4 S's, which is essentially sex, supplies, services, and safety. 2 of the 4. And if you provide the narcissist with 2 of the 4, you're in. The job is yours. So drop it.
It's a job.
Victims self-aggrandize, honestly. Victims self-aggrandize. They make themselves special. Because to be rejected like this is a narcissistic injury, and they triggers narcissistic defenses. So if you're rejected like this, you're discarded and devalued this way, you need to make sense of it somehow.
Yeah.
And you need to compensate yourself for this horrible insult, for these horrible humiliations. To do that, you become grandiose. It's one of the vectors of contagion. You mentioned contagion.
Yeah.
Narcissist triggers in you narcissistic defenses, such as grandiosity. When the narcissist rejects you, humiliates you, criticizes you, and so on and so forth, this triggers in you a narcissistic defense. He says, you're stupid, and you say to yourself, not only am I not stupid, but I'm much more clever than him, which is self-aggrandizing statement. He discards you, and then you say he discarded me because I'm an empath. Another nonsensical term.
Yes.
Because I'm an empath. And I'm not only an empath, I'm a super galactic, supernova empath. I'm kidding you not. They have these hierarchies, they compete, they attack each other. This has a name in clinical psychology. It's known as competitive victimhood. So the victims of narcissists are driven to defend themselves by becoming narcissists. This is reactive narcissism. This is the contagion. The narcissist places you in an impossible situation where if you persist in being normal and healthy, you're going to keep go on suffering. You're going to suffer all the time. And then you have to develop a thick skin, the thick skin of narcissism. So you become a narcissist. And then as a narcissist, you give as good as you get. You give him a taste of his own medicine. And maybe that will somehow domesticate him, like a dog, housebreak him, somehow quell the inexorable attack on you. The narcissist's aim is to deanimate you, to render you an Egyptian mummy. The narcissist's ideal partner is someone who is immobile, deaf, dumb, and blind, 100% dependent, and unable to contradict or challenge the narcissist in any way, shape, or form. And the ideal is if you were a corpse. So there is a famous movie, Psycho, Hitchcock's famous movie, Psycho, where Norman Bates killed his mother, and then he embalmed her. He made her like an Egyptian mummy. And then every morning he takes her out of bed, he places her on a chair facing the window, and every evening he comes, he bathes her, he washes her, and he puts her in bed. She's dead. It's an Egyptian mummy. That is the narcissist's ideal partner. So if you let the narcissist, in due time, you will be dead internally, if not externally. Dead. Totally dead.
Yeah,
it's a survival thing.
I remember when I heard you say that for the first time, that comparison to the movie Psycho, and I was like, whoa, this is nuts. 'Cause I remember watching that movie when I was younger, and I was like, I thought it was so shocking to see that. And it took me a long time, because I watched that movie as a kid, to understand that. Now it takes me to one other question, which is, I heard a lot about cognitive therapy. A lot of these narcissists, they say that this is the treatment for them. But I heard two different opinions about it, and I want your input on this, which is, some people say that cognitive therapy can teach them how to how basically learning how to function, basically understanding what people expect out of them, which is kind of like learning how to imitate people, or read their reactions, or present them what they want to see. On the other hand, some the narcissists take that opportunity to just learn how to manipulate better. So what is is there I mean, I know there's no treatment. I don't know. That's the only thing I've heard. Cognitive therapy. You don't deal with the past. You don't deal with the history or the roots of the problem. You just
self-aware narcissists, self-proclaimed self-aware narcissists online are con artists. They're scammers. All of them, no exception. They're scammers because they play on the need to have hope. People need to have hope. The flip side, there's the coin. One of the sides of the coin is the victim's self-aggrandizement. I've been chosen. I've become a victim because I'm a special person. And the flip side of this coin is narcissism is not hopeless. It can be cured. It can be healed. It can be... Anyone who goes online and says that they're self-aware narcissists, they're going to therapy, they're a much better person, and they're out to help the victims. They love the victims. They're out to help them. They're conning you. They're manipulating you. And they're laughing all the way to the bank, or multiple banks in many cases. End of story. There are no nuances.
Yeah.
So, and why is that? There is a panoply of therapies. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel dedicated to 12 therapies, which somehow we use to tackle narcissistic personality disorder. And so the best we can do with the most powerful therapies we have, the best we can do, is to modify certain behaviors. We can, and it has been tried and success, in altering behaviors of narcissists which are antisocial or psychopathic, abrasive, unpleasant, and so on. So we can teach the narcissist to behave differently and to become more palatable, more acceptable, more livable with other people, and so on. In other words, to function socially and teach a narcissist social functioning, the way we teach, for example, people with autism spectrum disorder, same. The problem with narcissists is that it doesn't last long, and so there's a need for maintenance sessions. Like the narcissist reverts like a boomerang, reverts to form. So all the time you need to do the same thing every 6 months. Yeah. But if you do it every 6 months, then you can have a different narcissist. You can have a narcissist who is now not obnoxious, not insulting, not aggressive, not, who is more self-aware or aware of certain behaviors and so on. So yes, a certain transformation in people with narcissistic personality disorder, however short-term, is possible. However, none of the core features of narcissistic personality disorder is touchable, let alone amendable. None. Not the lack of empathy, not the virulent envy, not the tendency to exploit people, not the aggression, none of these clinical features, not the lack of functioning self, not the inability to distinguish external from internal and treat people like extensions. All these are untouchable, simply untouchable. That we cannot make a dent, nothing, zero impact whatsoever, completely. There is a debate, of course, which of the therapies is better at modifying behavior. And so some would say CBT. I disagree. I think therapies like schema therapy and so on are more powerful. Transactional analysis to some extent and so on. But yeah, CBT could be good if the motivation of the therapist, the psychological background for some of the behaviors is actually problems with self-esteem, what we call self-esteem discrepancy. When the narcissist internally feels inferior and compensates for it by pretending to be superior. When the narcissist holds himself in contempt and projects it and holds other people in contempt. In all these situations, CBT, cognitive behavior therapies, might work and sometimes do work. In other situations, schema therapy and so on. There's no shortage of therapies. There's therapy developed by Kernberg himself, which is pretty powerful. So there's no shortage of therapies. But to say that there has been any fundamental, essential, meaningful change in the narcissist, as these people do, these self-aware,
no.
That's a lie. That's a con. Simple. And there are many con artists out there, especially in this field. Many. They include people with academic degrees, PhDs in psychology, professors of psychology, who have never, ever written a paper on psychology, never participated in any international conference on psychology, never taught narcissism, I'm sorry, not psychology, never written a paper on narcissism, never participated in conferences on narcissism, never taught narcissism, ever, anywhere. And yet they claim to be experts on narcissism.
Yeah.
There are many swindlers out there, and an academic degree is no guarantee that they're not scamming you. So walk very carefully, it's a minefield. And don't be gullible. Don't be gullible. Stop with this. This is what got you where you are to start with, you know?
Yeah.
Just
I think
don't be naive, you know?
I think the field is so confusing, especially for people that don't know much about it and jumping in now, especially people that think they're partners or are narcissistic, they want to go into therapy and all that. I think most of the therapists really don't know what they're dealing with. It's so new. It's so some of these people that it's very much a debate that they say that there's no point in doing, let's say, couples therapy when the therapist is not specialized in this field, so they don't understand what's going on. Eventually, the victim comes out of it even worse, and then the narcissist manipulates the entire situation. So I think it's a very difficult place to be in when you're trying to figure this out. At the same time, I do see something that you point out all the time, which is the rise of the victims, the empaths and all that. That became maybe another different kind of narcissistic wave altogether, because now all of a sudden there's a different realm and they're chosen ones and they're special. And they milk that to an extent that it's crazy. It's all the time.
I think I can give you 3 litmus tests. If you come across someone who claims to be an expert or claims to want to help you or whatever, and this person tells you that you've done no wrong, that it's not your fault 100%, that you have been angelic and immaculate and you've contributed nothing to your predicament and so on, that's a con artist. If you come across someone who tells you that victimhood, or to be a victim, that the fact that you've been victimized means that you are now a victim. In other words, someone who tries to sell you identity politics. Like, now you're a victim. What has happened to you defines you, has changed you, made you into a new person. That's a con artist. If you come across someone who invalidates you, on the other hand, who tells you it's nothing, or it was all your fault, or that's also a con artist. So these are the 3 litmus tests. And if you apply these litmus tests, suddenly 99% of YouTube will disappear. Yeah. Because they're trying to sell you victimhood. They're trying to sell you on perfection, like you're a perfect entity who has done no wrong.
Yeah.
And they're trying, on the other hand, they're trying to tell you that it was all your fault and you need to change yourself somehow. That's the self-help industry. The self-help industry, the message is something's wrong with you and you need to fix yourself. It's an equal scam. It's also a scam. The truth is somewhere in the middle. You've made bad choices. Your decisions were wrong. You betrayed yourself by not running away as soon as you felt uncomfortable. On the one hand, on the other hand, of course, you're not guilty for what has happened to you. No excuse for abuse, and so on and so forth. And what has happened to you is narcissistic abuse is one of the most harrowing experiences imaginable. And you deserve sympathy, of course, and so on. On the third hand, having been victimized doesn't mean that this should define the rest of your life. On the very contrary, you need to fight this concept of I'm a victim, this victimhood identity, and so on and so forth. You need to be balanced and calibrated. There is a defense mechanism known as splitting. Splitting is an infantile defense mechanism. It's a defense mechanism that is deactivated when you're about 2 to 3 years old. And splitting means that you have a black and white thinking, what we call dichotomous thinking. And you say, this person is all bad and I'm all good. So when you say the narcissist is all bad, it's a demon, and I've heard that too. Yeah. And I'm all good, what you're doing is you're splitting. Because no one is all bad and no one is all good. So you're splitting. And here's the irony. Splitting is the main defense mechanism in narcissism. It's the narcissist defense mechanism. You're becoming a narcissist. When you're claiming that you're an empath or a super galactic nova empath, and that makes you super special and amazing, and you've been chosen because you are so unique that, et cetera, what is happening to you is you're turning into a narcissist. And of course, At the same time, you're saying the narcissist is evil and wicked and demonic and beyond redemption and so on. That is also splitting. That is also something a narcissist would say. And the narcissist is saying this about you, rest assured, because narcissists play the victim all the time.
It's so ironic because I was reading a discussion on this forum, and this is exactly, you see people all the time trying to, how do I get revenge on a narcissist? How do I do this? How do I do that? It's always at the same time that you're portraying yourself as this empath, angel, and angelic and benevolent.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
start, I mean, the amount of questions on a daily basis directed towards how do I get revenge? How do I create a narcissistic mortification for him? How do I make him do this, and that? And one of I went in one time and I said, you're asking all the wrong questions. If this is still your focus, you're doing exactly what they want you to do. You're becoming one of them. I mean, I think the entire, I actually saw a person that I haven't seen in years, and I saw that person, we went to a cafe, he sat down, and it was the first thing out of his mouth, oh, I'm an empath, by the way. And I was like, okay. I mean, it's almost like this divide you're talking about, all good, all bad. It is ironically the core of their narcissistic personality and the way they operate. It's crazy.
And there is no clinical construct of empath. It's online nonsense. It's hype. There are many such constructs online that have no basis, foundational ground in clinical psychology. So there's no such thing as empath. There's no such thing as shy borderline or quiet borderline. There's no such thing as emotional flashback. These are all nonsense. These are all hypes. And the list is much longer. We have to finish because it's 1.5 hours and no one will survive.
I'm sorry.
No one will survive beyond this. Trust me.
I was saying, thank you so much. It's been, oh my gosh, such a delight to talk to you. It's such an amazing teacher. I learned so much from you, and I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, so
would you like me to send you the recording? Because you haven't recorded.
Yes, please.
I'll send you the recording.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Take care. I learned a lot from you. I learned a lot from you about dogs and their psychology and so on. Really, honestly.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Minha gente, foi essa a nossa conversa, tá? Eu espero que vocês tenham gostado. Eu espero que a tradução, ou melhor, a legenda, né, tenha ficado relativamente clara para vocês. Ele é um super profissional nessa área, eu acho que ele é uma referência para todo mundo que quer aprender um pouco mais. Aqui na descrição do vídeo eu deixei o link do site dele, vocês vão encontrar ele no YouTube, o canal do YouTube dele é riquíssimo em material. O material dele é em inglês, tá? Mas eu acho que tem plataformas aí que vocês podem pegar os vídeos e tentar fazer essas traduções, essas legendas parecidas, mas ele é uma das pessoas que explica transtornos de personalidade de uma maneira completamente diferente, muito mais aprofundada, muito mais abrangente. Eu acho que vale muito a pena vocês conhecerem. Eu fiz questão de dividir essa entrevista com vocês aqui, porque eu sei que eu tento fazer muitos paralelos com a questão do treinamento dos cães, mas tem coisas que vocês vão tirar aqui para quem é adestrador, para quem tem cachorro, coisas que vocês podem sentar e refletir. Para os adestradores, vocês aprenderem a identificar certas coisas no universo dos cães de vocês, ou dos clientes, né, donos dos cães que vocês atendem, dentro do universo online, dentro do nosso mercado, mas mais do que qualquer relação com o mundo do adestramento, eu acho que é entender personalidade e comportamento humano. Mais do que nunca, a gente está numa era, como ele mesmo disse na entrevista, uma era onde isso está em ascensão, e a gente precisa aprender a lidar com as pessoas de um jeito diferente. Você vai cruzar com pessoas assim em algum momento da sua vida. Quem não já cruzou, vai cruzar. É aprender a reconhecer os sinais. Eu gostaria muito que os livros dele existissem em português. Eu tenho 3 livros dele que são absolutamente fantásticos, e eu concordo com ele, assim, você não vai achar na internet pessoas que falam sobre transtorno de personalidade, principalmente sobre transtorno, patológico narcisista, da maneira como ele fala. Ele tem o diagnóstico, ele mesmo, então quem lê o primeiro livro, a história dele, o Diário Narcisista, vocês vão entender mais ou menos como que é a história dele, como que ele se formou. Então, cara, o material em vídeo dele não tem preço, de verdade, assim. Quem entende inglês, mergulha, cara, que é um vídeo melhor que o outro, são vídeos longos, são muito detalhados. Quem não entende inglês, cara, tá hoje na era da inteligência artificial, peguem plataformas aí que pode colocar pelo menos uma legenda em português para vocês, porque vale a pena. Não existe ninguém no nível dele nesse mercado, ninguém, tá? Eu acho que isso vale para o mundo inteiro. Eu sei que tem muita gente falando sobre esse tipo de transtorno na internet no Brasil e aqui também, mas, cara, ninguém chega nem na poeira do que esse cara já colocou de conteúdo a nível de riqueza, profundidade e valor mesmo. O conteúdo dele é fenomenal. Então, eu espero que vocês tenham gostado. Eu sei que a tela não ficou exatamente no lugar ideal. Eu queria ter me tirado da tela para ocupar mais, mas é uma questão de configuração do estúdio aqui, eu tive que ficar. Mas se vocês tiverem dúvida em relação a esse assunto, quiserem deixar pergunta ou sugerir que eu fale mais sobre esse tema numa live com vocês, fiquem à vontade, tá bom? Eu vou trazer esse conteúdo assim para vocês com mais frequência agora. Então, me dê o feedback de vocês depois, tá bom? Obrigado a todo mundo que participou, que acompanhou aqui. Assistam o replay, cara. Guardem essa live, compartilhem, porque essa é uma informação valiosíssima e com certeza vale a pena ver de novo, como se dizia antigamente, né? Obrigada, turma. Um beijo.